Hey, I'm Jeff Howland, and this is the sixth episode of How to Human, which is where I talk about how to be a better human in my pursuit of understanding this. And so this is not me lecturing on how to be a better human. This is me trying to figure it out and explaining what I think in my pursuit. So, I last one I did of these was was that 7-8 months ago, and I was really thinking that maybe I just wouldn't do this series and I wouldn't publish any of them, and and then I thought about it a little more, and I kind of decided I might as well do this. I might as well just put it out there, have my say. I don't think anyone really cares anyway, so I might as well do it, and and I think it'll help me collect my thoughts, which is the idea of this anyway. How to be a better human. That's what I'm trying to do. So I'm putting my thoughts out there for the people who do listen and are interested. Any feedback I get will help me to understand my position a little better, because I'll have to think about the feedback, and then that will cause me to reevaluate whatever it is that I get feedback on. So there can't really be any bad things that come of this, I think. So it's best to just do it and put it out there. So this time what I'm going to talk about is positive and negative feedback loops. So this is really important, and I think not well understood. Some people understand it in the sense of electronics. When you get a feedback loop, say with a microphone getting close to a speaker, it'll make like a loud piercing noise, like ee, that kind of a noise. And that's a feedback loop in that the speaker puts out some kind of sound, and the microphone picks up on it, which then goes out the speaker, which then comes out the microphone, and it just keeps going and going and going, and becomes very annoying and loud, and is piercing. And so this we could relate to a negative feedback loop. And so other negative feedback loops might be, say you're depressed, and so you eat too much, and then you become fat, and then you eat more because you're more depressed, and then you eat too much, and then you become fatter. And so that's a negative feedback loop. Or if, say you're socially awkward and you try to talk to someone and it doesn't turn out well for whatever reason, and then you become more socially awkward, and so you're less likely to try to talk to people, and when you do try to talk to people, it becomes even more socially awkward. So that's a negative feedback loop. So in contrast to those are positive feedback loops. So a positive feedback loop might be that you exercise, and then you feel better, and that gives you more energy, and then you exercise more, and then that makes you feel better, and so on, and then you become healthier. And so that's a positive feedback loop. Or for me, my case in singing, I practice singing and I get better at singing, which means I want to sing more, which means I get better at singing. So that's a positive feedback loop. So by doing something, it affects something else, such as the speaker and the microphone reacting together. And based on your value judgments of whether this is positive or negative thing for you, the fact is it's increasing. And so the feedback loop is really describing some kind of increasing system where one thing feeds another, so that they're connected. So that as something comes around, I'm not very good at this, as something comes around one or the other thing, it like feeds into itself. So we have the speaker, which lets out some noise, which comes around here to the microphone, which then comes back around. So something like that, where things are connected together. You could think of that in a way like the snake that eats its own tail, whereas like a snake is around here, the head, and then here's the tail, and then the head eats the tail. Like that's a common kind of mythological picture called the Ouroboros, I believe. And in that picture, that's a kind of feedback loop showing that two things are connected, but just a kind of symbolic thing. But the really important thing is to understand what these things are, positive and negative feedback, and to try to evaluate where they're at in your life. And I would say that the easy ones to fall into are the negative feedback loops, because it's easier to get negatives often than positives, especially in our kind of chaotic and disassociated culture that that we have, where there's a lot of rules, and the rules aren't necessarily good for most people, and so following them can put you in a weird place where, even though you're following the rules as you should be, it's not actually good for you. And breaking the rules is also not necessarily good for you. So it's very difficult to find what you should be doing under this kind of situation. And I think a lot of food that is sold is not necessarily healthy for you, and so if you eat it, you become unhealthy, and then you kind of don't have a way to turn that around. It just kind of keeps getting worse. It's like the aging process. Often people look at the aging process as mostly a negative, where you get older and then you get weaker and your skin isn't as good and all this kind of stuff. But there are not just other ways of looking at this, there are other effects that can be had out of this. For instance, one of the really positive aspects of aging is the experience you get. And if you are able to take the experiences you have and use them to help yourself make better decisions in the future, then you will have better outcomes in the future. And so that becomes a positive feedback loop. And so in that way, you can look at this as a positive. And of course, if you're exercising and it's making you stronger and more healthy, this is a positive feedback loop. And so there's certainly degradation that occurs with aging in certain aspects, but that doesn't mean that there can't mostly be a lot of these positive things coming out of it. And it's not just a matter of perspective, like, oh, I'm going to look at this positively. If you do it right, you really get positive results. If you do it in a way that's not going to give you good results, then it'll be negative and you'll get a negative feedback loop. So your health gets worse and you exercise less, and then you kind of decay faster. You just get weaker, and then the weakness makes you want to do less things, and doing less things makes you less healthy, and your muscles atrophy and your bones start to lose density, and you become weaker and weaker, and that's a negative feedback loop. And so these two concepts of negative and positive feedback loops, I think, aren't really brought into people's thinking about their lives and trying to find things in their lives that are negative feedback loops. Like maybe you have relationships with someone that doesn't work out well and you get in arguments all the time and it adds to stress, and that's a negative feedback loop. Or there's people in your life that you have really positive interactions with and they're positive feedback loops. And so for the negative feedback loops, you want to try to break that negative cycle. And for the positive feedback loops, you want to try to strengthen that positive cycle so that you keep it going. You don't do anything to destroy the positive feedback loop. You try to make it stronger up to the point where if you did anything more, you would negatively affect the situation. And so in all situations, you can do too much or too little. As soon as the word too comes into play in some kind of description, in that sense, you can tell it's wrong. If it's too much or too little, if it's too big or too small, then when you're looking at it, you can just see this isn't right. So you want to scale it back a little bit. So I look at these things really seriously in my life, and I try to see if I'm doing something that is negative for me and is creating a negative feedback loop. I want to understand why it is and see what I can do to change it, to make it either turn it into a positive feedback loop or just disrupt it or just move away from it. And then anything that I can find in my life that's a positive feedback loop, I want to do more of that thing up to the point where it would become worse in some way. So everything has a limit on how good it can be. So I'm going to get into this more later on, but I just wanted to do kind of an introductory video to describe the ideas and kind of put it out there so I could reference it. And if you hadn't heard about these before or thought about them before, try thinking about what it is in your life that is like a negative feedback loop. That's like the speaker and microphone together that screeches and gets worse as they get closer together. And then think about things in your life that are a positive feedback loop. And I think that it's a good exercise to do. And if you can create a lot of positive feedback loops in your life, and I feel like I've been lucky enough to be able to do this in a lot of my life, a lot of aspects of my life, then it's just a much better way to live. I feel much happier than I used to when I had a lot more negative feedback loops in my life, and I had a lot of uncontrolled negative feedback loops. And now I feel like the negative feedback loops that do exist are kind of weakening and getting kind of ready to fall apart in a lot of ways. And the positive feedback loops I have, they're kind of growing, and I'm finding more of them, and they're getting stronger, and I feel like that's a healthy place to be. It doesn't mean that everything I do is healthy, but I feel like I'm moving in a healthy direction. And so I found that this really works for me. Thinking about them as these specific thing really works for me. And so I thought it would be an interesting point to make in this video series. And I'm going to refer to it an awful lot of times because I think that these things are kind of tools. And as a tool, you can apply it in a lot of different situations. And so no matter what you're doing, if you're studying or you're doing things at your job, or you have a relationship, or you're trying to make any kind of changes in your life, or you're just going about your daily thing, like how you drive and things. Like maybe you like driving and you like to get better at it. And so you make little adjustments all the time that make your driving better, which then allows you to see more things, and you've experienced more differences so that you can fine tune what you do and you become a better driver, or whatever it is that you're interested in. Art or music, any kind of subject, you can make these changes over time, and that is a positive feedback loop. If you get better, if it improves you, and you're having some positive effect come out of it, and then it increases as you make changes, that's a positive feedback loop. And even your ability to understand what a positive feedback loop is, and to be able to tune things to be positive feedback loops, can be a positive feedback loop in itself, so that you end up creating these like meta positive feedback loops where you have the ability to create positive feedback loops in a better and better way from creating positive feedback loops. And people have like the saying of like a spiral of self-destruction, which would be someone who is better and better at creating negative feedback loops for themselves, and is creating maybe more negative feedback loops. So I think this is an interesting concept, and I just wanted to present it in its own video so that it would be easy to reference, because this is a tool that I will come back to many times, and I'll refer to it. So that's the first one of these that I've done in 8 months, and I'm going to try to just kind of knock them out from now on. They'll either be kind of short, like this one's 10 minutes, maybe even 5 minutes, but probably more of them will be like 30 minutes, since I tend to want to kind of go into a topic a little bit more. But I'm not going to stress out about it too much. I'll just kind of do this and see what happens. So 6th, How to Human, and I look forward to doing more. Thanks.